Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin Enders, and I am the Director of Strategy for Verity ES. And today we're going to be talking about options for erasing disks in laptops and desktops. I have a lot of conversations with customers both in the ITED space and in the enterprise space, and there's still quite a bit of confusion around options that are available, techniques that you can use, and really what are the pros and cons of those particular techniques. So we're going to go through all of that today. First thing first, there are a lot of challenges associated with erasing disks in laptops and desktops. They're individual devices, so they need their own power in a lot of cases. They need peripherals. You need a lot of space. The reports can be tricky to organize because all the devices are individual. And some of the processes that you can use can be quite labor intensive. There's one in particular that we're going to talk about that's really labor intensive. So there are a lot of challenges associated with it, but there are some techniques that help you minimize those challenges. So let's talk about those options that are available. The first one is simply pretty straightforward. You take the disks out and you erase them in loose form. The second one is using a bootable USB or a bootable external hard drive. And we'll talk about what that means in more detail and what's good and bad about it here in a second. The third is delivering the sanitization software to the disks via a host server and a LAN connection. And the last one I have listed here is delivering the software over the internet, which most companies call remote erasure. We're not going to talk about remote erasure on this video. There'll be a future video specifically about remote erasure. So those top three that are on there, let's talk about what they are and what's good and bad about each one of them. So loose form erasure, how does it work? Pretty straightforward. You take the disks out and you erase them either using external fan outs like I've shown here in the image or disk erasure hardware. You may have some of that internal. You may have purchased a hardware device that allows you to erase disks. But in this case, you have to take them out of the laptop and the desktop and then put them back in if you want that to be a whole unit once you're finished. Some pros and some cons to this. The pros are it's actually quite easy to do. The actual erasure part of it is easy to do. It doesn't require as much space. It doesn't require you to adjust the boot order of the laptop or the desktop. And we'll talk some more about that with the other options that are available. You don't have to have the laptops and the desktops powered up to execute the process. So in that case, it's easy. Where it gets very complicated and labor intensive is pretty straightforward. You got to take all those disks out. If you want to put them back in, then you got to put them back in at the end. The second thing that may not be very good about this is batch sizes are limited to the hardware available. So if you have a hardware erasure device that can do 24 disks, that's the maximum you're going to be able to hook up. The third thing is often overlooked, but there's no cooling mechanism for the disks being erased if they're in loose format. So disks inside a device are typically cooled by a fan. We all know these disks can get quite hot. That heat can have not only performance impacts on the disks, but it can also get your fingers. I can speak from experience. We all know how hot they get. The second option is booting off of a USB or a boot disk. In this option, you simply have the software on the USB or the boot disk connected into the USB port on your targeted laptop or desktop, and then adjust the boot order of the laptop or desktop to boot into the USB or the boot disk. The boot disk has the software on it, has an operating system. You boot into that operating system. Then the software can see the disk internal to the laptop or the desktop. You follow the steps in the software and you erase the disk. Reasonably straightforward. As with the other options, there are some good things about it and some not good things about it. From the standpoint of the pros, it is a very portable solution. Wow, you can pack a bunch of USBs in a suitcase or in a bag and go wherever you want with them. So it's very portable. You do not have to remove the disks to erase them, which is a big deal. It saves you a lot of labor. And most of the devices have permanency in them so that the reports are stored on the USB or the boot disk once the erasure process completes. There are some downsides to this one or two. It does require you to adjust the boot order. So while you're booting up the laptop or the desktop, you do have to adjust the boot order so that you're booting off of the USB or the boot disk. You do not want to boot off the internal drive in the laptop or the desktop. The second one is something I want to highlight here. While there is permanency typically on the USB or the boot disk, so that the reports are stored there, if you're doing a bunch of these and you got a bunch of USB disks, at the end of it all, you got a bunch of USB disks with a bunch of reports. You need to centralize those somehow. So there's labor associated with taking them all off of the USB disks and getting them into a central database or something where they're all recorded. The third thing here is the laptops and the desktops have to be powered on. That can be tricky in some situations. We've all been in a situation probably where you're asked to go to a customer site and they say, we're going to give you a bench or we're going to give you a conference room. Well, that's great, but you sit there and say to yourself, how many laptops and desktops am I going to be able to get powered on before I'm popping a breaker in this conference room? The last thing here is with this technique, you are going to need a monitor, keyboard, and a mouse for the desktops. You do have to adjust the boot order, and the only way you're going to be able to tell the process is running is to be able to see it. So you're going to need a monitor for your desktop. The third option to execute the erasure process is sanitization over a LAN connection. This is where you take a central host server connected to an Ethernet switch via an Ethernet cable, and then spawn Ethernet cables off to each one of the targeted laptops and desktops. Like the other options, it does have some great things and it does have some not so great things. From the pros standpoint, you don't have to take the disks out. The other thing that's valuable is the host collects all the reports in one place. So you don't have a bunch of USB disks or boot disks, each one having a report on it. Your central host collects all those reports so you don't have to go and pull them off the USB sticks at the end. The other thing is you can do remote access and monitoring if you're using a host server that you can connect to the internet. There are some downsides to this one though too. You do have to adjust the boot order to allow for Pixie boot. You cannot boot off the internal hard drive in the laptop or the desktop. You do have to have Ethernet cables and switches. Some desktops may not have Ethernet ports. And if you don't have an Ethernet one of those little Ethernet dongles, you're really kind of in a tough spot. You won't be able to use this technique on that device. The laptops and desktops still have to be powered on. You still need a monitor, keyboard, and a mouse if you're going to use the desktop. So let's wrap all this up real quick. For loose disks, it is by far the most labor intensive, but it doesn't require the system to be powered on. It is probably it's the version of this that requires the least amount of expertise. USB and a boot disk solution, very little hardware required, right? You've got either USBs or boot disks. It does require you to power on the target device, the laptop or the desktop you're targeting, and it does require you to adjust the boot order. The reports are not centralized. They're on the USB or the boot disk, and you have to take them and move them somewhere else when you're finished. The LAN connection does require power to the targets in the host. You do have to adjust the boot order to allow for Pixie boot. The reports are collected in a central host, and you can use remote actions, launch or monitoring, if you have a host server that has an internet connection. So at a high level, I hope that it illuminates some. There's obviously a lot more detail in a lot of this. Feel free to reach out, questions, comments. I'd love for your feedback. I'd love to help you out any further that I can. There's a lot more videos available on the site, so please take a look at those. And I will talk to you in the next one. Thanks.